Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to ask you one more time if you can stop. We have a movie that we're beginning with. Andrei Yermak has brought this.
Lives. Yet we will never allow them to shatter our core values. Ukraine aspires to a just, comprehensive and enduring peace. President Zelensky has presented the Ukrainian peace formula globally. 10 points, 10 key directions based on the principles of the UN Charter and international law. Radiation and nuclear safety, food security, energy security, release of captives and deported persons, restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, withdrawal of Russian troops and cessation of hostilities, restoration of justice, environmental safety, prevention of escalation and aggression, confirmation of war ending. Each point of the formula is based on the principles of international law. Each one is supported by the relevant resolution of the UN General Assembly or the Security Council. The formula offers a toolkit to achieve peace in Ukraine, but also it could serve as a universal conflict resolution mechanism worldwide. The peace formula allows every country to demonstrate leadership and influence shaping of the international agenda. It operates on 3 levels, creating a platform for global collaboration. The first level involves ambassadors of participating countries. 7 thematic meetings have already been held in Kyiv, with over 70 countries participating. But the diplomatic community can work anywhere outside Ukraine. In that case, our embassies all over the world would serve as coordinators of expert and political support for the peace formula. The second level involves meetings of national security advisors. Key advisors of world leaders have begun shaping the agenda in Copenhagen, Denmark, and Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The third level involves heads of states and governments. Ukraine is already working on the Founding Peace Summit. It will mark the beginning of 10 summits, each one dedicated to a specific point of the formula. The final stage will be the second Global Peace Summit, solidifying the end of the war and establishing the long-awaited just peace. Implementing the peace formula signifies the restoration of respect for international law and the UN Charter. It will bring enduring peace to Ukraine and the world.
All right, there you have it. That is from Andrei Yermak's office. We have a wonderful panel here. Andrei Yermak, the head of the Office of the President. Boris Johnson, of course, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain. Alexander Matvichuk, who is the head of the Center for Civil Liberties. A sad comment on the circumstances of where we are is that when she won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022, she won it with a Belarusian and a Russian, I think both of whom are not in very good condition right now in terms of their own civil liberties and freedom. And of course, Francis Fukuyama, one of the most famous scholars in the world, senior fellow at Stanford University. Andrei, let me begin with you and just pick up on that video. When you present this idea of a global peace initiative, do you find that are countries willing to go along this path, even though the points 7, 8, 9, as I remember, 10, these are all requiring Russia to give back territory, to respect the sovereignty of Ukraine. These are not things the Russians seem likely to do. Are you finding support among countries to push the Russians to agree to this formula?
Thank you, Farid. First of all, then President Zelensky 1 year ago presented the peaceful formula in Bali in G20. Of course, it was some surprise for our partners, but for us it was very important because before it, it started to appear some ideas, some plans, some proposals from different parts of the world. But of course, we still think that Ukraine have the right to propose the peaceful plan, because war is here and aggression against Ukraine. And of course, we want to be very active and proactive and to keep this initiative. The peaceful formula of President Zelensky consists, as you can see, of the 10 points. All of these 10 points, it's based on the international law and the chapters of United Nations. And of course, when it's appeared, when we started to talk about it, many people honestly not clearly understand what is it. It was very many questions. Why you believe that it's real way to the peace and the end of the war? And of course, we're starting to do this job to explain. We're starting to talk with our partners. But of course, in the beginning, we understand it's necessary to involve all the world. And the main principles of this platform, that we are ready to listen, we are ready to speak the all civilized world. One thing is very important. This country have to respect international law, respect chapter of United Nations, respect Ukrainian independence, respect our territorial integrity in internationally recognized border, and respect our sovereignty. We are ready to listen. We are ready to discuss. Before Copenhagen, where we have the first meeting in the level of security advisors and political directors, honestly, it was mostly very skeptical. And not many countries believe that it can be happened, and the countries of Global South will be ready to participate. And just before a couple of the days, it was the situation, happened, not happened, but it's happened. And thank you very much. I'd like to use this opportunity to say the world's thanks to the Prime Minister of Denmark and her team, because they immediately decided that they support and they organize these meetings. Then we think and we decided that it's very important that the second place will be in the Global South. Maybe you remember that last year we have very successful exchange of the prisoners when we was able to back 250 people, including 5 heroes from 5 commanders from Azovstal, and plus 10 foreigners. In that exchange, very big role played Saudi Arabia. And we back, you know, that the President Zelensky have the very, very success and very unpleasant to Russians visit and participations in the Arabian Leagues. And in that meetings, he decided that the leaders of the Saudi Arabia that they will be involved in this procedure. And after some preparation work, it happens very, very successful and important meeting in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, in which we can involve 3 times more countries, including China, including India, including Brazil, including South Africa, including, of course, many countries of the Gulf. And what is the most important? That then we're talking in the table. Everybody agreed just about aggression. Everybody was agreed, and we were in the same principles of the international law, of the chapter of United Nations, of the independence, what for us it's critically important, of our territorial integrity, and it's in our understanding territorial integrity, and sovereignty. Of course, it's true that we have some different opinion, positions, how we get the results. But the historical that we can and we continue this work to unite the world, because we have some not successful experience. And I was very happy that my colleagues from Germany and France openly said, yes, now we can say that Normandy formats, Minsk formats was not successful. And we see what happens. Because what is a big principle and big difference? Civilized world, the countries who is responsible, we need to have one joint plan and then working for implementation this plan. And our peaceful formula, it's not just about the end of the war. It's not just about the how to settle the crisis, which is a result of this war. It's about how to prevent in the future. And why it's interesting, I'm sure, and it will be global platform. And we're now looking for the next meeting on the level of advisors. And of course, we are looking for the first peaceful summit in the level of the leaders. Thank you.
At what point does somebody have to engage with the Russians in this process? You said Saudi Arabia was helpful in the prisoner exchange because they have good relations with Russia. Do you need other such intermediaries to act in order to because at some point the Russians have to be involved in to produce a ceasefire, to produce and some of those goals?
You know, Farid, I don't believe in mediation. It's enough in mediation in our past history. It's not work. In what I believe, first of all, and our position very strong and very clear, that we're not just thinking about any negotiations till the last Russian soldiers in our land. But the peaceful formula, it's built in such a way. It's 10 points, and the last points, it's juridical confirmation of the end of the war. But before, it's necessary to make this very hard job by each 9 points, which you can see and listen. And of course, in the second peaceful summit, after, when we can be able to realize everything which described in 9 points, yes, of course, it will be some possibility to meet, and to meet not just between Russia and Ukraine, to meet these all countries who will be participate, who will be with us on this way, who will be guarantors that we are juridically fixed, that this war it's ended. Ukraine back all our territory. Ukraine received all the compensation for all these damages. And all these people who is made these crimes will receive full responsibility.
There are reports in newspapers that while you are pursuing NATO membership, of course, you are also talking to countries individually about specific security guarantees in the meantime, particularly with the United States, to develop an Israel-like situation, is the way it's been described. Are those talks going well?
You know, first of all, I think that the Ukrainian reality, it's very difficult to compare this somebody else. We have our way, we have this war, and we have, unfortunately, after 24 February last year, all the people in the world understand that existing system of the security, it's not work. And of course, the most guaranteed security is the membership of in NATO. And we all of us very happy that after Vilnius, nobody can speaking about it's happened or not. Now it's only questions when. The questions happened or not, it's closed. But of course, in this way, we need the real security guarantees. We never repeat, and we are in our head, still we have Budapest Memorandum. It means that we exactly understand what work, what not work. And of course, we are, just before Vilnius Summit, we're starting to speak with our partners, colleagues about these security guarantees, and this is the way of this work, and it's a greeting of this declaration, which is a very, very important. And now the more than 20 countries more join to this declaration, and I'm sure this procedure will be continued. And already we have started negotiation, concretely negotiation with United States, and delegations working already on the text of the agreements. We already started with Great Britain. We already started, decided about starting with Canada, with Japan, and many other countries. I think all this together, it's give the opportunity to build the new security systems which help Ukraine to be secure, real be able to not just defend and to show that anybody potential aggressor in the future just not started to think or to beg or to start some illegal aggression.
Boris Johnson, how do you view this problem of, you said that you were not for negotiation with Putin, but a lot of people, and you know in Europe, are supporting Ukraine, but hope very much, and I'm thinking of the French, and I'm thinking of the Germans, that this will quickly lead to a negotiation, that Ukraine needs to compromise, that Crimea is very hard to take back militarily. And how is Ukraine going to navigate when many of the key supporters are looking for some kind of a negotiated settlement?
Well, thanks. First of all, I want to say how strongly I support the plan that Andriy Yermak has just spelt out, and to try to get to a peaceful solution. You can't be more Ukrainian than the Ukrainians. You know, if there's a way of doing some sort of peaceful solution, then of course that should be done. Everybody's praying for that, but I don't think that is possible with Vladimir Putin. My impression is that that's not really likely to be achieved. You know, Yevgeny Prigozhin thought he had a deal with Vladimir Putin, and that didn't work very well for him, right? So I think I'm skeptical, but of course we've got to hope that it works. The most important thing for the world is to prove that our values work, democracy, liberty, the defense of freedom, are valuable, and that we stick up for them. And that means supporting Ukraine right the way through, as Andriy Yermak says, until the last Russian soldier has left sovereign Ukrainian territory. That's what I think our job is. And that's certainly going to be the position of the UK if I have anything to do with it. And I think that will be the position of, that's a cross-party consensus in the UK. But, you know, the long-term question really is around NATO and about security guarantees. We have to be absolutely clear with ourselves that the NATO issue was integrally bound up with the problem of Putin's aggression. And if we hadn't been so chronically ambiguous, if we hadn't tried to suck and blow at once, I'm speaking about the West, I'm speaking about the NATO, it's very difficult to do, you try it. But that's what we were doing. We were speaking out of both sides of our mouth when it came to Ukraine and NATO membership. That was the disaster. And what is needed now is to show that we're willing to have Ukraine in NATO as fast as possible. As fast as possible. And that is... And you know, what works is NATO. No one has attacked a NATO country for 80 years, right? As far as I can remember. I mean, may correct me if I'm wrong, Francis, but off the top of my head...
The United States in 9/11 may be the exception.
Okay, all right, correct. And we came, and they invoked Article 5, and we came to their defense, right? And that is a very, very powerful guarantee. That is a massive psychological support for a country, and a massive deterrent to anybody who would seek to attack that country. NATO works. It's proved that it works. And we've exhausted all the alternatives. Putin has comprehensively demolished the argument against Ukrainian membership of NATO. The argument was that if you had Ukraine precipitately in NATO, then you might provoke Putin. Right. That argument doesn't look very good these days. Okay? Look what he did without Ukraine being in NATO. We've tried that. We tried not having Ukraine in NATO. It's led to the worst war in Europe for 80 years, hundreds of thousands of people dead. It's a disaster. The only answer is to get Ukraine in NATO as fast as possible. And that is the long-term solution. And okay, it's going to be a tough thing for some people in Russia to swallow and to accept. But it has the great virtue of clarity. As it says in the Bible, faith, hope, and clarity. Not quite. I'm paraphrasing. The greatest of these is clarity. And people will know where the boundaries of NATO are, and I think that is the solution that we all need to be working for together. That's the institution that works. Let's go for that.
A new rewriting of the Book of Revelations from Boris Johnson. It's Ecclesiastes, I think it is. I think it's Ecclesiastes. Yes. Let me ask Frank Fukuyama. Do you think that you have an assault on the international order, and you have an assault on the kind of liberal international order, but the people who are attacking it, like Russia, also have a kind of domestic agenda, which is also to attack the liberal project? Putin says that Ukraine must not win in this war because otherwise children will be told that they can't use the right bathrooms for boys and girls, that transgenderism will flourish, that gay rights will flourish, that abortions will become, so it seems to me that there's a connection here between Putin's domestic ideology, which is very anti-liberal, and his foreign policy, which is also an attack on liberalism.
Well, I think the attack on liberalism comes actually from both directions, from both the right and the left. At my university, at Stanford University, most of the students think that liberalism is, that's something for the older generation, and there's a reason for that, because liberal societies have produced a lot of inequality. They have not delivered on the promise that everybody is actually going to be respected and have equal access to justice and so on and so forth. And so there's a populist critique that, in certain ways is merited. The one on the right is a little bit different. The best way of putting it, the most sympathetic way of putting it is that liberals don't have strong community, right? In a liberal society, you can have whatever religion, whatever beliefs, you can, different ethnicities, very diverse.
You can have freedom.
You can have freedom, but that comes at the expense of community. You don't have these tight bonds of social solidarity that you have in other kinds of societies, and people want something more than what liberalism offers. Now, the thing about the transgenderism is a little bit tricky, because I think that many liberals in the West have paid special emphasis to a certain kind of social liberalism. For me, as a classical liberal, what that means is freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. But it also includes, things that have to do with civil rights, and so equal rights for women, for gays and lesbians, for transgender people, and so forth. And I think that one of the things that's happened in the last decade is that latter social part of the agenda has been pushed very hard, and it's given people like Putin ammunition. So when he or Viktor Orban say they don't want liberalism, we're thinking, oh, that means no rights for journalists. But actually the way they're putting it is, we don't want you to force this kind of social progressive ism on us. And I think that that's been pretty tricky, and that's what's really given common cause between Putin and like all these conservative evangelicals in the United States, because they really don't like that kind of social liberal. And I have to say, there are many parts of sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, other parts of the world that are simply much more conservative socially. And again, to the extent that you can identify liberalism per se with that set of issues, then people are going to start getting off the boat, and that's causing a problem.
Boris Johnson, you're shaking your head ruefully.
Well, it just seems to me that if you weigh the two sets of liberal concerns that you've identified, Francis, in the balance, you've got one absolutely relatively Lilliputian issue, which has been grossly escalated in the public discourse, whatever your views on it. And then you've got the questions of invading a sovereign country, taking away people's liberty, crushing freedom of speech, as you say, taking away the power of journalists to report what they want to report. These are of fantastic importance for humanity. And they work. By the way, talking about what works, liberalism and democracy work, okay? I mean, the type of free societies. Let me just speak up for these societies where everybody's entitled to have these views which are attacked in the way that the conservatives around the world are. I mean, I'm a conservative, but I'm also mainly a liberal, right? And I think people should be able to say and live their lives as they please, provided they do no harm to others, right? That's John Stuart Mill, the father of liberalism. And that's the most successful economic model. That will bring talented
Boris,
people to your country.
So the title of this panel was What's Going Right and What's Going Wrong.
Yeah.
And I was going to actually start my intervention by saying how great liberalism is.
Oh, good.
Classical liberalism. So we don't disagree there.
Okay, good.
But there is this challenge that Frank describes correctly. I watched an interview with Viktor Orban that Tucker Carlson did. And what Orban says is, I am against liberalism, because liberalism is all about the self, about the ego, about the individual's rights and freedoms. But there are more important things than the individual. God, family, country, culture. And so he's building this, this idea, which, in some ways reminds you of the 1930s, of an ideology that says the individual is nothing, the collective is everything. And I wanted to ask Alexander Matvichuk, you're trying to build civil society in Ukraine. You're trying to build a liberal democracy, the culture of a liberal democracy. In some ways, it seems as though it's easier to do in Ukraine because these values are threatened and people are defending them with their lives. But do you worry about that idea of a kind of appeal to, to these larger things, God, country, the way that Orban is talking about it?
May I speak from the point of human rights lawyer? Because before, we have an illusion that the problem is in a lack of attention to human rights violations. And when the war started in 2014, we sent numerous reports to UN, to Council of Europe, to OSCE, to European Union about torture, about sexual violence and extrajudicial killings of people in occupied territories. But when large-scale invasions started and we got this attention, we finally revealed that the problem is much more deeper. That even with all this world attention, we can't stop Russian atrocities and defend a human being. Which shows very clearly something which is visible to people in Afghanistan, people in Syria, people in Myanmar, in Sudan, in other countries, that the main question of our century is how we will defend human beings, their rights, their freedom, and their human dignity. Can we rely on the law, or just weapons matter? Because I found myself in a situation when someone asked me about how to defend human rights of people who live in occupied territories, and I can only answer, if you want to defend people here, please provide Ukraine weapons to be able to defend ourselves. So I think this is the main question, not those that Orban tried to put on the agenda. And based on this fact, I would like to remind that it's not task for Ukraine to solve this question of the century, but the task of entire international community. What Russia tried to convince the whole world with this war? Russia tried to convince that democracy, rule of law, and human rights are fake values. Russia tries to convince that country with a strong military potential and nuclear weapons can dictate the rules of the game to the entire international community and even forcibly change internationally recognized borders. And if we will not be able to restore international order, to stop Russia, and to demonstrate justice, it will have a huge impact to the whole world. And we can find ourselves in such version of future in which the world will be dangerous for everyone without any exception. So I have two messages. First, that we are very grateful to the whole world and our partners who helped Ukraine to resist when the large-scale invasion started. But we have to change this narrative to another one, to help Ukraine to win fast. It's a huge difference between let's help Ukraine not to fail and let's help Ukraine to win fast. We can measure this difference practically in types of weapons, in speed of decisions and gravity of sanctions. Let's help Ukraine to win fast for the entire world. We have to win the value dimension of this war. This war has not just military one. This is not just a war between two states. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. We have to prove that democracy is effective, that rule of law is functional, and international order, human rights, and freedom is not something just mentioned in conventions and declarations, but our practical policy.
And Alexandra, if somebody were to say to you, you are a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, and yet you are saying help Ukraine in this war, what would you say?
I think that I have been documenting war crimes for 9 years. And I know what does it mean, peace, for Ukrainians. Ukrainians want peace much more than anyone else. But peace will not come when country who was invaded stop fighting. It will be not a peace, it will be occupation. And occupation is just another forms of the war. Occupation is not about changing one state flag to another state flag. Occupation means enforced disappearances, tortures, sexual violence, mass graves, denial of identity, re-educated Ukrainian children as Russians. This is occupation. We have no right to leave our people alone for torture and death in occupied territories. The life of people can't be political compromise. And maybe something which Ukraine can demonstrate to the whole world, that values is essential, and we have to defend the values of democracy, of rule of law and freedom.
One of the countries in the global south, or I don't know if one would place it in the global south, but one of the countries that I think people have been somewhat disappointed has not been more firmly on Ukraine's side is Israel. Sorry. Israel has, to be fair, it has voted for the condemnation of the aggression in the UN, but it has also maintained very close ties with Russia. It has been very reluctant to help Ukraine militarily, and it has maintained a kind of military dialogue with Russia over Syria. And I think many people, Israel derives so much of its moral authority from talking about being a democracy in a troubled region, being a democracy in a region of dictatorships. And no one has been more eloquent on this issue of democracy than Natan Sharansky, great dissident turned minister in the Israeli government, and we happen to have him here. So Natan, I thought I would ask you to reflect on this puzzle and help us all understand it.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for marvelous conference, Victor. Thank you. And every member of this panel is my personal hero. Very briefly, look, I personally was the lobbyist for Ukraine from the very first second of the war. And I tried to explain to everybody, including our American friends, it's not the war for the peace of territory in Ukraine, it's the war for the future of free will. And I have to say, it was really unpleasant surprise that I found myself again a dissident, but this time not in the Soviet Union, but in Israel. By the way, there is overwhelming support of Ukraine in the public opinion of Israel. I think more than in other countries. 75% say that Ukraine is right and we have to fight for Ukraine. And in all types of tens of thousands of people are helping, in volunteering and so on. But when you speak with the leaders, and I spoke with all of them, especially with our military leaders, they say, look, we have reasons to try to be neutral. And I have to say, they have a reason, with which I don't agree. But the reason is they say, we have to defend the existence of Israel. That's what Israel was about, defend the future of Jewish people. We have an enemy, Iran, death and life. He speaks publicly that needs nuclear weapon, the world without Israel. That's what they say publicly. The 60,000 missiles of Hezbollah, they all from Iran, are directed towards Israel. Israel is like Kievskaya gubernia. And every night, don't be surprised, every night Israeli airplanes are attacking bases near Damascus, all over Lebanon, over Syria. And they say what to do. It is free world. which gave full control over the skies of Syria to Putin. Just when Putin went to Crimea a few weeks before this, he went to Syria. And in order to attack every day these bases which threaten to our existence, we need neutrality of Putin, and we have agreement. And that's why we cannot play without this. Well, I fully disagree with this, but and I can explain, but it's not important. What is important that we have strange situation. Israel believes, and that America decided from the times of Obama that we should be engaged with Iran and we should not try to change the regime. That's the words of the president. We should be engaged with Iran. So America is peacifying Iran and fighting Russia. And Israel is peacifying Russia and fighting Iran. It's absolutely absurd situation. And what I'm saying, and again I remind, I'm full enthusiastic supporter of Ukraine, and well, Andrei knows it very well. But I say it is absolutely normal situation when tyrants, Iran and Putin, are coordinating their efforts, are working together more and more, and free world, everybody chose with whom to fight and whom to appease. That's something which has to be changed. Well, I have some other comments, but if you like.
Andrei, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Nathan. You are really great friends of Ukraine and my personal friends, and thank you very much for everything which you're doing. I'd like to tell this story for our colleagues. 1 year ago, we organized the second Crimean platform. We're sitting after speech of the president, and near of me, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I asked Dmitro, and I don't see the Israel in the list of the country who is participated. Why? He said, they refused, they don't. Said, it's not right. I take my phone and text it to Nathan. It's during the speeching then of some leaders, during 2 hours, when we have Crimean platform, Nathan answered immediately and said yes. If official Israel refused, I will be participated. And it was great because he was introducing by Mustafa Jamilov, and it was very, very important. And we always know many things. Presidents today said very clear that he yesterday had the phone conversation, finally have the phone conversation with Prime Minister of Israel. And a lot of times when we are speaking with our colleagues from Israel, we said just two things. Look, we're now in Bankova. 500 meters from this place, bore Golda Meir, the founders of the Israel state. Please imagine what she said then he coming to Kiev today and see what happened with Ukraine. And the second, and Victor participated and Nathan participated in this, based on the initiative of the presidents, we started to rebuild the memoriam of Babi Yar. Maybe you know that one of the first rockets and missiles took to the territory of the Babi Yar and killed one family. Once again, in the place then happened one of the biggest tragedy of Holocaust. It's mean I don't know what it's necessary happened additionally that our colleagues, our friends from Israel really be in the position of good. Because now the world, now this war, it's demonstrated that sometimes happened then you in the side of good or in the side of evil. Thank you, Nathan.
Boris.
Yeah, thank you. I want to say something very much in support of what Alexandra just said about the need for speed in what the West is doing. Because earlier today I went to see one of the rehabilitation centers, the recovery center where injured veterans of the war are being treated. And it was truly humbling to see the injuries that these guys have suffered, the really, really cruel and life-changing injuries that they are experiencing. And every day, more and more Ukrainians are going through this. And I had two thoughts about it, talking to them. The first was that Ukraine will win, because each of them remained absolutely convinced of the rightness of what they were doing. And they were so proud that their units, their regiments were taking back territory that belongs to Ukraine. And they told me about that. But the second thing is that we owe it to these guys, to everybody fighting for freedom, to get on with it. You know, this whole history of this conflict, the West has always been, you know, a couple of beats behind, if not more. And we need to speed up, and we need to be intensifying the economic pressure on Putin. I think it's absolutely, and I've come to the conclusion that Russian state assets that are currently frozen, the $300 billion worth in the Cayman Islands or the US or wherever, it's crazy that those should go back to Putin at the end of this. They clearly need to be put into escrow to be used to rebuild Ukraine. And the second thing is, even more important, accelerate the weapons program. It's clear from It's clear from talking to the President Zelensky that Ukraine now needs ATACMS. It needs anti-aircraft protection. If the Ukrainian infantry is going to advance safely, we need to get on with this. It needs DPICMs, it needs demining stuff. It needs it all now. And my question to my friends, and I see many, many colleagues from other Western countries and governments, you know, why are we waiting? What is this? Why delay? Get on with it now, and we save life. We save the appalling. We spare so many young men the appalling injuries that they're currently suffering. We bring this wretched, disastrous episode to a conclusion. So I do not know what the case. I do not know morally why we are delaying. We always end up giving what is needed, but we do it months and months too late. Let's just accelerate, cut to the chase, give Ukraine what they need to win as fast as possible.
Frank Fukuyama, at the start of this conflict, I remember you and I talking, and you said to me that you were quite confident that Ukraine would win. What gives you that confidence, and do you still have it?
Well, there's several things. You know, my center at Stanford has been running a number of leadership programs for mid-career younger Ukrainians. Lesia was one of the participants of that a few years ago. And then we've been teaching courses here in Lviv, Kharkiv, and here in Kyiv over the last 7-8 years. And so that, first of all, made me realize that there is a really substantial layer of very well-educated but very pro-Western, very pro-European younger Ukrainians. And for all of the problems with corruption and bad governance that Ukraine has suffered from, when these people come into their own, they are going to remake the country. And it just seemed to me that, you know, it was going to take time, but that was happening, you know, before my eyes. The other thing just had to do with just looking at military developments and the degree to which Ukraine had absorbed, you know, it was something I think that really came from these American doctrines like commander's intent, mission orders, and so forth. But the army had been transformed, and if you put that kind of restructuring and training together with the motivation, the intrinsic motivation, it seemed to me that Ukraine really had some big, big advantages. The other thing that I don't think any of us fully recognize is how incompetent the Russians were and are. I mean, they've been learning a bit, over the last year and a half, but they've made mistakes that, and have suffered from systemic corruption, officers selling the tires off of their trucks, to enrich themselves permanently, that sort of thing, which I think a lot of people simply didn't recognize. So collectively, that's why I thought, this country is going to win this war.
I have to say my own sense of it was always, I viewed the conflict, maybe because I grew up in India, less in terms of this East-West NATO issue, but it seemed to me a classic case of a multinational empire trying to hold on to its colony. This is in effect the last multinational empire that is trying to hold on to its colony. And it sees Ukraine as special, and it cannot imagine Russian power without a subordinate Ukraine. But France thought very much the same about Algeria. People forget, France even thought of Algeria as not even a colony. They said it's part of France. They called it a département of France. And they killed 1 million Algerians in trying to hold on to that colony over 15 years. And it didn't work, because the story of the 20th century is when a people want to be free, you can use all the military might in the world, and it's just, at the end of the day, it is my sense of history, but also my hope that free people win.
So Farid, why is it so difficult to make that point to our friends in India?
Well, the Indians would give exactly the kind of answer that Natan gave, which is 90% of their advanced military weaponry comes from Russia. They have had a long 70-year relationship with Russia. For 70 years, when the issue of Kashmir came up in the Security Council, they had one country that would always veto it for them, which was Russia. But again, similar to what Natan said, if you took a poll in India, the vast majority of people think this is an act of aggression, that the Russians are wrong, that the Ukrainians are on the right side. And like Natan, whenever I have been in India, I have made the case that this is a case where India's values and its interests should come together. And that India is actually powerful enough that even if it were to break with Russia on this, the Russians have nowhere to go. They would still, sell them the weaponry. Natan, you want to say something?
I want a few words, because this fascinating argument between conservatives, liberals, and human rights, and Ukraine, of course, reminds me of something very important. 32 years ago, I'm meeting with President Bush, father, about some questions. It's the last year of Soviet Union, Soviet Jews, Israel. He was helpful. But then he says to me, Natan, you know so well Soviet Union and Ukraine. He said, give me advice. I go to Kyiv. I want to convince Kyiv not to leave Soviet Union. They have to stay. How I can convince? I was shocked. I said, why? Why should free world convince Ukraine? So after 350 years of dependence. And he says, you don't understand, we can rely on Gorbachev, its stability. And if all these nationalism, and he said nationalism, you understand, they'll go out of control with nuclear weapons, how we can be sure that the world will be stable? No, I tried to convince him. He went to Kyiv, made his famous Kyiv chicken speech, convincing Ukrainians few months before they got independence to stay in the Soviet Union. So since then, no, of course they laughed, but since then, for 30 years, nationalism becomes more and more negative term. Simply, that nationalism is war, nationalism is imperialism, nationalism is awful. Then comes Putin, says Ukrainians are not nation, 24 hours before. Ukraine is artificial creation of Lenin, we'll bring it back. And Ukrainians prove that their nation is extreme passionate nationalism and fighting for their freedom. So we have to, in fact, thank you, because you are rehabilitating the word nationalism. You know how Israel is criticized for being Jewish democratic state? Ukraine wants to be Ukrainian national state. Nationalism of Putin is nationalism of imperialism. It's very dangerous. And Orban, nationalism of Ukraine is base of the struggle for freedom. So stop giving names to the word nationals. Okay.
So
Actually,
your encounter with Bush reminds me of the whole debate over NATO expansion in the United States and in Europe. And I always thought that one part that that debate missed was, should the United States push it? How will Putin react? Was that there were other people involved in that. The Poles, the Czechs, the Estonians, the Latvians, and the question of how they were going to feel if they were not part of some security structure, having lived for 45 years under Soviet tyranny, having been denied their national independence, the idea that Europe would be more secure, leaving these countries in the middle, fearful of their security, and I think we have a similar situation now, which is to understand the Ukrainians get a vote too, and whether they are Ukrainians, whether they are a nation, and that is what, as you say, they are showing, what not just with their vote, but with their lives, that they are indeed a nation. We have to move to the next panel. Thank you all very much.